morning, early morning march through the countryside, and I'm still on the subject of consciousness. It's the Thinking Tree channel. What do you expect? And Simon's thing about the difference between, or do people have different consciousnesses? Well, depends what you mean by consciousness, because are we talking about the intimate sense of I am, of being, in which case, the what's it like to be a bat thing sort of is solved, because yes, there is something that it's like to be a bat, but you have to be a bat to know what that's like, meaning that you have to have the qualia of a bat. But the sense of being, regardless of whether you're a bat or not, could possibly be anyway. Wow, it's a big load of swifts and swallows. Huge group of them. So there's a sense of being, and that could be the consciousness kind of thing. And then the qualia, like I said, on top of that, gives that sense of being a texture, and that's dependent on the architecture in which the sense of being finds itself. So have I the architecture of a sheep, then I'll have a different sense of being than had I the architecture of a bat or a human being. And then I think I mentioned the panpsychists and Philip Goff, or I wouldn't like to say exactly what Philip Goff's position is, but I'm just thinking about people like that, because there are different kinds of panpsychists who, might say that everything to an extent is conscious, and that consciousness, or that everything to an extent is conscious, and so therefore electrons, therefore every single cell. But then you have the sort of, I don't know what they call it, but like a sort of, I suppose, like a conglomeration problem or something. So that if I had a cell, is a cell conscious? But a cell might be made up of, dozens or hundreds of little parts. Is each one of those parts conscious in itself? I am a colony of cells, trillions of them. Am I then a trillion times conscious? And why does it feel like one consciousness then for me if I'm a trillion times conscious? So that's a bit of a problem I foresee. All of this though is, coming from the understanding of our position, modern physics position. So if you understand the world as functioning, having to function like this, and we do, and everything, but if you understand the world having to function like this, cause, effect, equal and opposite reactions, blah 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 blah, and classical physics, then of course we're going to need everything to fit into that framework. But what if it doesn't work like that? What if the rules, what if reality is much greater than that, and we're looking at a tiny speck and we're making rules for this tiny speck, but they don't apply to the rest? It's also speculation, so it's difficult to go there. And then there are people like Federico Fagin, and I think probably Bernardo Kastrup and plenty of others, who would say, well, in science, they say, give me one premise, and the premise is everything's made up of matter or whatever. And he would say, well, give me one premise, and my premise is everything's made up of consciousness. So if I put consciousness first, as opposed to matter first, and matter creates consciousness, then it solves a lot of problems. So they want to put consciousness at the very foundation and say everything is consciousness, and then all of this derives or emerges out of consciousness. And this is the thing that would sort of, in my mind, solve the problem of the conglomeration of consciousnesses idea. If consciousness was the default, the most fundamental, and it would, in creating everything, in everything else springing from consciousness as an expression, it would automatically have that sense of awareness, presence, self-awareness. And we don't mean self-awareness as in self-recognition in a mirror, which also plenty of animals have, and birds, interestingly, for Alan, especially for Alan. I'm going into German, especially crows and I think magpies as well. So it's not self-recognition like that, it's self-awareness. If that was fundamentally in everything and it was only the one, then it's not, in the case of the cells, a conglomeration of thousands of consciousnesses that have to create the illusion of one consciousness, but it's just the same one consciousness. It's the same one state because it's the fundamental. Sort of like the, I think it might have been Rupert Spira who said it nicely, but like there's sort of a universal consciousness and threads of it are dragged down, you know, like localized points of consciousness where this thing thinks that it's separate, embodies a apparent physical being and goes around thinking it's separate, but as soon as it's released from its apparent physical state, that consciousness just springs back to being the one again. It's not, they're not separate components or separated parts, they're still part of that one thing. So that's interesting. We'll get around this sort of conglomeration problem, and then that one sense of being, depending on the architecture it's in, the apparent physical form it takes on, would then be coloured by qualia, which would give it the sense of being this. Yeah, so the sense of being plus, that's where we chip in and start saying, yeah, but consciousness is different for everything else. It's not the same for everybody. No, it's not, if that's the way you're defining consciousness. But if you're defining it as just the sense of presence, then it could. If the sense of presence on this was what I came to yesterday when I was walking again, the sense of presence though were the fundamental, why would it need itself to gather qualia? The sense of self surely would be enough, I would have thought. But it then, either on purpose or accidentally, begins to express itself in 1,000 million different forms, as we see, possibly in order to gain information about itself, and it gains that information through qualia. So a tree would have different qualia than a bat, and so on and so forth, and the more qualia it experiences, the more information it gets about itself or its potentials or its boundaries or whatever. But the fundamental thing would be I am, a sense of presence. I don't know why a sense of presence would require qualia information about itself. Don't you think we need to really worry about that yet? What would be interesting experimentally would be the sense of self separate. Is it separate from qualia? And the other thing was, I hit on Penrose, Hammeroff and orchestrated, I can't remember what it's called, but their theory that consciousness is created in microtubules in the brain, and it's quantum phenomena. The wave collapses in the microtubules and creates the bling moment of consciousness kind of thing. Microtubules are present not just in brains, they're present in all different places, but I think, as far as I know, only in eukaryotic cells, so not in prokaryotic cells. Fine, but then plants have eukaryotic cells. Does it happen there? Is there a wave function collapse in the microtubules in plants' eukaryotic cells? Does that create a moment of consciousness? And the experiments are running and seem to be quite positive up to now that that does happen, meaning there is a quantum effect in the microtubules. And so the next stage of that would be, once we find out that that's the case, and we can consider this to be consciousness, is this happening in other structures, other architecture like plants? Because if it's the same conditions in both those cells and one leads to consciousness, then we're going to have to assume that that happens in other cells as well. So that's quite interesting. It doesn't get me any closer to Simon's question and answer. I just think there might be a separation between those two things. That's ultimately what I'm trying to say. That maybe we're misunderstanding, but it depends on your definition of consciousness. But it's hard, which is why Chalmers called it the hard problem. Otherwise he would have called it the easy peasy problem, wouldn't he? He didn't. All of this is, of course, highly speculative. Yeah, because if we knew, we wouldn't be discussing it. So the only reason we're discussing this is because we don't know. I just find it very appealing. The possibility is very appealing to me that we have no real grasp on the magnitude of reality. Fiddling around with science in a little tiny area, like I said, and we have no idea of the actual state and magnificence of reality or the simplicity. And so it appeals to me the possibility coming from the other end that this is, like I say, a great illusion, a grand illusion, highly complex, for us absolutely convincing, but a dream in a dream in a dream in a dream. And we're measuring dream stuff and getting the answers that we want, or getting the answers that we allow ourselves to make because we're measuring dream stuff. It's like sort of wandering through a maze kind of thing, and every time you think, yeah, well, there must be a left coming up, then a left comes up. It just appears, plop, out of nowhere. We create the maze as we go along, kind of thing, the complexity. And every time we discover something, we go, we've discovered something, see, we're on the right track. But I think there's a potential that the maze is a simulation, or not a simulation, but it's creating itself, it's fluid, it's able to adapt, and we influence that. Maybe we collapse a wave function and influence that so that the maze gives us the answers that we expect, kind of thing. But we're not seeing the overall labyrinth. Have a lovely weekend.